to start tonight, though, with a very disturbing story. Tanya Plibersek delivered a speech in the House of Representatives yesterday, and I've been on about this with Peter Dutton this week and for months and months. A former Afghan army officer being executed by the Taliban. He previously worked as an interpreter for the Australian Defence Force. I think the speech by Tanya Plibersek deserves to be heard by us all. Here it is in its entirety from the Parliament yesterday.
I want to speak today about reports that a former Afghan army officer has been executed in Afghanistan. While his name is being withheld to protect his family, this officer previously worked as an interpreter for the ADF. He's been living in fear of exactly this reprisal, and his wife and 3 children are still in hiding. After the fall of Kabul, the family were trying to secure a visa to Australia to join his sister here. I want to honour this man and the work he did on behalf of his nation and ours. I want to send my deepest condolences to his family in Afghanistan, who must be terrified for their own safety, and his sister and any relatives here whose worst nightmare has come true. We honour this man's memory, but we should have done more to protect his life. While we have taken some steps to accept Afghan refugees to Australia, this process has lacked urgency and began well after it should have. Too little, too late. We have a moral obligation to help people who risked their lives side by side with Australian troops. Veterans of the Afghan conflict tell me they are suffering moral injury every day, feeling powerless to help the Afghan mates they relied on. But we also have a strong strategic reason to offer this protection now. At some point in the future, our soldiers will again be involved in conflict. And when that happens, they will need to work with local security, local interpreters, local intelligence. If we fail our allies today, who will be our allies tomorrow?
Tanya Plibersek, can I just say that is a magnificent statement, and can I just say, and I don't mean to embarrass you, but I have to say this delivered by a woman whose own brother was murdered. Tanya, does the government have no shame about this? I've been arguing about the urgent need to support these post-Kabul who supported us. We just don't seem to be getting anywhere at all. Tanya.
It's so frustratingly slow, Alan. I know that you've been talking about this for months. So have I. So has the Labor opposition. More importantly, so have our veterans who... I spoke to Heston Russell yesterday. I know someone you've interviewed in the past, Alan, about what this means for Australian veterans who served in Afghanistan, the pain that it causes them to think about their mates that they left behind and to wonder what happens next. When we are serving again overseas in areas of conflict, in danger, who is going to help our soldiers then if this is how we treat...
the big point. Yeah. Conchetta, are we getting anywhere? Now, Tanya has said that this man worked on behalf of our nation and the process to protect these people, her words, has lacked urgency and begun well after it should have, too little, too late. What are your thoughts, Conchetta?
Well, from the outset, I'm on the record as having pointed out the madness of the extraction from Kabul airport after the US and Australian forces had withdrawn. I and many others, and I know Heston and other people, find it very stressful to witness these events now playing out as it was inevitable. Given the failed extraction from Kabul. And I expect, however, Alan, and this is the sad part, that the 24-hour news and media and marketing cycle is going to aid and abet those responsible because people forget the caravan moves on.
Absolutely.
And those responsible will not be held to account.
Absolutely. But can I bring you, Conchetta, to the second point, which is a point of your philosophical strength? When Tanya said, and this is really a bullet point, at some point in the future, our soldiers will again be involved in conflict. And when that happens, they'll need to work with local security, local interpreters and local intelligence. And then, if we fail our allies today, who will be our allies tomorrow? Conchetta, this is a major national issue, surely.
Well, Alan, it reinforces what former Prime Minister Howard said back in July, that we have a moral obligation to provide asylum and that the fate of the Afghanis should not be decided on narrow legalism. He went on to talk about Vietnam and that he did not want to see a repetition of that failure in relation to Afghanistan. And sadly, I think what we have seen is a repetition of that failure, which will reflect on our credibility in the future.
Absolutely. Tanya, I played on this program last week extracts of your Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs, Penny Wong, trying to get answers at the Senate inquiry into this whole farce in Afghanistan after the embassy closed. I want our viewers to listen to this again, and I'd like you both ladies to comment. The person that you refer to in that speech was a former Afghan army officer who worked for us, and his family are still there, awaiting the same treatment. Execution, it's called. Penny Wong asked last week in that Senate inquiry about people who are employed in the embassy and employed by third parties contracted to the embassy. She wanted to know if Australian officials, the Blazer Brigade, if they knew how many such people, not Australians, but people who worked for us, because if they worked for us and were left behind, as I said last week, they'd be slaughtered. Now we've got this story today. Listen to the response that Penny Wong received, and you'll see all those starched shirt people sitting around the table and they can't answer. Listen to this.
Did anybody ascertain or indicate how many people were likely to apply for locally engaged staff, employees?
There was no specific number given to the Department of Home Affairs.
Did DFAT or Defence ever come up with a number that they anticipated about likely demand?
Mainly Defence. Rod. Senator, we constantly monitored how many numbers we had, yes,
Well, you would probably have seen over 20 years of estimates on the other side, on this side. I really just like the word constantly. I'm trying to understand if, as a consequence of the deteriorating security situation, you gave an assessment about increased numbers for locally engaged employees to anybody inside the department or to Home Affairs?
I'd have to take on notice.
Well, Tanya, I'm not sure, colleague, your comments there, it's just this, the pregnant pauses. They've got no answers to fundamental issues. Tanya.
I don't know if they don't know or they won't say, but either is unacceptable. We've been told there's about 280 Australians and Australian permanent residents still stuck in Afghanistan, but the government refuses to release information about others who have helped us, who are applying for visas.
Yes.
The family of this man who was murdered have tried to get assistance.
Since August.
They report from the... And they've asked for help from people who served side by side with him so they could talk about the role that he played with them, and they've been stonewalled at every turn. It's just not acceptable. It's just not acceptable.
Conchetta, what do you make of this? I mean, does that pick up that last point of Tanya's? Now, the family of this man who's been assassinated, the family fear that there are other members of that family, his wife and others, who are at risk. So they wanted to say, I can guarantee there are two soldiers over there whom he knows, whom he worked with, and they'll guarantee that that's part of the family. Could we have contact? No, we can't breach confidentiality. Conchetta, what do you make of Penny Wong's total inability to get an answer of any kind from these people? How many locally engaged employees were there? In other words, people who are employed by the embassy and were contracted to work, and by working for the embassy, they were Taliban enemies. Conchetta, just listen to Senator Wong again.
I'm asking if anybody made an assessment of the likely numbers of applicants of LEEs as at April, May. I think the answer's no.
Senator, I gather from the response of colleagues that the answer is no.
Correct.
That bloke at the end of the table is General Campbell. She's simply saying, could you please tell us how many people who worked for us are still there? Not an answer. Pauses, impregnated and jargon. Conchetta.
Well, Alan, I was present at the hearing. I was engaged remotely. I can't believe that this basic information was not kept and also not kept updated. I think this whole debacle, regrettably, smacks of a combined level of incompetence across the different levels of government. But it goes back to the point that I made earlier, the madness of extraction out of Kabul after the US and the Australian forces were withdrawn. And of course, going to figures, we do know, however, we did get some figures that there are 26,000 applications involving about 100,000 people, of which some are in country and some are outside, some that do have connection to Australia. But of course, despite the assurances by immigration that more work teams will be put onto this, I suspect it's going to be a very long and laborious process.
They've still got their jobs. Conchetta, does someone in defence understand the Taliban doesn't differentiate between those who worked inside the embassy and those who worked outside? I mean, the government should know how many of these interpreters and guards are left behind. The government had a contract with their employers. I'm advised there are hundreds of them. And you've made that point, they were our allies. If we fail our allies today, who will be our allies tomorrow? Now, you've made this, it's a final point here, and I've said this before, but I've got to say it again. The poor man's wife and children, as you've said, are hiding in Afghanistan. The Sydney-based lawyer representing the family has been in touch with the assassinated interpreter's sister and has said they've been trying to get visas to come, the family to come to Australia to be rescued. I mean, when it was Tiananmen Square, Bob Hawke said, we'll look after you, bring them in. Tanya, I don't know, you're a powerful political figure. Where do we go?
Well, Alan, think about what it's like to be a single woman in Afghanistan at the moment, trying to raise your family when your husband's been murdered, and what's likely to happen to that woman.
Well, think about being the daughters.
The Taliban
think about being the daughters. The daughters.
Absolutely.
Conchetta, these family applied for a humanitarian visa on August 26. Today's October 21. They followed up with the Immigration Department on several occasions to try to expedite the visa process. This is the family of an interpreter who was on the Taliban kill list and was murdered for his connection to the Australian Army. Shouldn't someone, Conchetta, be sacked? I mean, because of these ridiculous delays. And we're sending a message to the world that we'll ask people to help us, but when they want help, we go missing. Conchetta.
Well, Alan, it's the point that I made earlier. What we're facing now, a lot of this was preventable. We knew there was a decision to pull out. Former President Trump set it out. First you bring out the citizens, then you bring out the equipment, then you disable the bases, and then you pull out the military. So we knew this, we knew it was coming. And now, of course, we have this circumstance where we've got thousands of applications, and what you're saying, Alan, is just one of a myriad which are going to come on top of the applications that are already existing under our humanitarian program. Alan, my bells are ringing now, so I do have to leave to go to a division.
A final question. You go, Conchetta. I just want a final question to Tanya, which we've already alluded to. And Tanya, I'm not being melodramatic here, but this assassinated man has young daughters. The Taliban can turn them into their brides and kill the son if they find him. And as I said earlier, I can't help but feel that Bob Hawke, as he did after Tiananmen Square, would have provided a home immediately here. Your final thoughts?
Well, I think the reporting says that the son is 19 years old. I don't doubt that he would experience the same fate as his father. And I think when we talk about Taliban brides, this really is a euphemism for women who will be kept in sexual slavery by people who have no respect for them. A bride is a euphemism. We know what that really means.
Well, the important thing is we can't afford to give up. I just can't believe any of this. Thank you for your time, to both of you, and we'll talk again next week.